Hi, everybody, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about identity, self-identity, and distortion of self-image. And I'll start with a personal story. That is, when I was in my early teens, my dad, who was always a fan of gadgets and electronics, and was in that business, he's an ISTJ, he got himself one of the early Betamax or VHS video cameras. A big clunky thing that you had on your shoulder, you'd walk around with, and he was taking video of anything and everything, as people would do with those sorts of gadgets at the time. So I was working on an old microcomputer or something, and he happened to kind of come in and start a conversation with me while putting me on video. I thought, no big deal. And then after he was done, he played it back to me, and I was shocked at the disconnect between how I thought I was and how I presented or projected myself out into the world. So that was a real eye-opener, and there's a word for that which goes back to the audio recording days called voice confrontation, as in when people would hear themselves, their own voice, it sounded very different from how they experienced their own voice when speaking. And there's a lot of discomfort around hearing yourself speak. Likewise, there's similar discomfort and cringe about watching yourself in action. And yeah, I've got that too. I've had to overcome it because part of my day-to-day is that I need to talk to people and present myself in a way that hopefully is competent. Anyway, so that voice confrontation, or the confrontation of self, how through the lens of how other people see us, it's instructive because we do have a self-image, and we impose on that self-image different labels. So I have, for instance, my hat. I now can bring myself onto the label of someone who wears hats. And if you're outside looking in at this person wearing a hat, you might have certain judging qualities or other opinions or just cruft that goes along with the label of a hat wearer. Maybe a little bit more strongly put, earlier today I was on my bicycle. Therefore, while I was on that bicycle, I had the label of cyclist. And when there are people who are drivers, they may see that cyclist and they may assign certain things to that label. It might be irresponsible or lawbreaker or to society, threat or menace. But the end result is just that these labels are things of how we put labels on ourselves based on the way that present ourselves. I've got particular fashion. It's not a coincidence that I've got a blazer on. And then people will see this and they will form certain opinions based on that appearance, the mannerisms, the behaviors, things that I can't see when I'm speaking and wearing a hat, because it's a different perspective. So the point that I'm getting at with all of this, taking off the hat label, the point I'm getting to all of this is that we identify in certain ways in typology. And it seems to us perfectly natural to say, I must be a thinker, I must be a feeler, I've got to be intuitive, just based on how one sees oneself from one's own perspective. But when you are someone on the outside looking in on that person, it provides a very different perspective and maybe a more of an impartial comparison, because they're not experiencing these things, but they're a witness to them. So they get to see things from their own perspective. And if you really want to get down to type, it is a combination of how you feel yourself and how others feel or see you. And in fact, RadishRaven in the past used to talk about having these discussions with their INFJ friend about who is how do you see type in society. I think that's what it was about. And it was like, do you determine it yourself? Is it based on your own being, or are you formed based on the opinions of others in your community? And in a sense, both are true. And RadishRaven, you'd really have to dig around. These are some older videos, but it was interesting the way that she framed the discussion between herself, an INFP, and her INFJ friend. But what I'll get at here is that people identify themselves in certain ways, but we all just know what's between our ears. And we don't have the perspective of being in someone else's head and seeing their actual thoughts. All we've got as our own frame of reference is what's inside our own head. And we have to compare that against how we see other people behave, even though we don't see how they see us behave. So it's complicated to try and sort out typology. However, you get to certain things like, and I'm going to read this out because RadishRaven, Ingrid, said this off the cuff, and it was absolutely beautiful. I've paraphrased it a bit here, but it's something that I hold as a series of self-evident truths, things that I would have said just as readily. And she just spoke it off the cuff in one of her videos because it just comes naturally as understanding. In this case, I'm going to read the piece just to make sure I reflect what she said, but it is all just fundamentally correct stuff from my perspective. Start quote. People seem to think that INFPs have this code of ethics book in their heads that they follow to the letter everywhere they go. Then they get confused because INFPs see them as inconsistent, because that's not how it works. Ethics are not, this is the truth. This is only personal truth, and there's many nuances to it. There's many layers. Sometimes I say things that don't truly reflect the factual reality in which we live, and that's because that's life. Life is not black and white. My code, whatever that is, it's not written down, it's malleable. And it can seem self-serving. It can seem that way because the world is complex. We need to simplify. And certain things that might seem contradictory can be true at the same time. Beautifully put. I mean, if you lead with FI and auxiliary NE, that is a fundamental conclusion that you're going to end up getting towards at some point in your journey of INFP maturity. That it's like, I just know what I know. Other people will have their own opinions, their own thoughts, their own worldview. And I can just be responsible for myself. And yes, I have all of these things that I look at and try to sort out the nuance, but I really can't say that, this is right and that's wrong. It's all very contextual and case dependent. So a lot of the time something has to come to me as a particular instance of an ethical question, and then it's possible to feel out the details and maybe collect more information and then sort out a very nuanced perspective as to whether or not that ethical, as a response to that ethical question about what might be a correct response or not. And that can also be very time consuming, to the point of, there was a Reddit post way back when that I was thinking about for a long time that talked about what people value. And I think it was after thinking about it for several days, I was kind of like, okay, I think I've determined how to define value within this broader question in the context of the question, in order to address the actual question itself. And it's a different way of looking at the world. So you may be looking at all of this and saying, yes, I understand what you mean, and I can identify with this, and I'm okay with it. But here's the rub. Someone who leads with TI or FI, this sort of stuff ends up being what they generate internally. It's not what they kind of accept from the world externally. That is, if you're a TI or FI lead, you are doing all of this crunching based on the observations or inputs from the outside world, but the feelings or thinking crunching that's happening is all internal. And the decisions that one makes based on that are also all internal. And I'll go to one kind of last example to illustrate this, and that is I was with my ISFJ stepmom and ISTJ dad the other day, and sat down for lunch and got an earful about politics and did you know that X and what about Y and were you aware of Z, and just a whole lot of political dogma from a specific perspective. And for me, it was like, well, I don't know these facts. None of this is anything that really is cogent to what I'm looking to judge at the moment. This is not, being fed this information doesn't make me necessarily agree with anything. I'm going to go and try and understand why you would bring these things, trot these things out in front of me, because that's kind of the more cogent or more interesting question about why is this such an important thing to you that you bring it into the conversation as if my political affiliation needs to be swayed in a particular way, or I need to be part of the labels in the tribe. I need to be, the hat wearer among hat wearers in order to, validate those points of view or maybe be convinced of them. But it really didn't do anything, because it's like I haven't met these political figures personally, and I haven't vetted any of this stuff, and I'm really not that interested in these aspects of SI distillation that are kind of accepted from an external source. If anything, I'm more interested in the things I'm interested in, which are more to do with how has this come up and how does this work our personal relationship, that these sorts of things are brought up, and what is the expectation of me, and what is the tribal requirement that I don't know, agree with this, or so anyway, I didn't say anything is what it came down to, because I didn't know what to say. I mean, I don't know if I agree or disagree. Some of the things that were trotted out didn't seem to pass the sniff test, but I mean, I don't know. I was just there to have my lunch and then get back to doing some work to help around the house. Anyway, going back to the starting theme of identity and self-identity, the point is that we label ourselves and then are seen in particular ways by the outside world, and having both perspectives is probably helpful. And then if we're looking at it from a typology lens, there are certain ways that we may see ourselves that may or may not actually be accurate to how we are, because we only feel how we feel. That said, if you feel a particular way and you really want to take that on board as a type and it's helpful to you, all the more power to you. But it may not be the way that, let's say, others see you or society sees you, and there is weight to what others witness as well that should be taken into consideration. And I think that's all I've got. Thanks for listening to my ramble. And I wish you, wherever you may be, my hat's off to you. And I wish you a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And bye for now.